Tell us about you talking to Elton John, first of all, on Starship. Starship was Elton's plane.
Right.
And John...
Formerly used by Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
It was sanitized well before we
it had some
took
previous,
control.
didn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so you and John Lennon on Elton John's plane. Tell us about that.
Well, we were actually on the way to Boston to play a date in Boston, and prior to that, John had a #1 record with Whatever Gets You Through the Night, which Elton had played on, and they'd made a sort of deal, a kind of temporary deal, that if the record got to #1, John would perform with Elton at Madison Square Garden later in the month. So the reason that John was on the plane going to Boston was because he wanted to see the show and see what he was setting himself up for. So we did that, and then we came back, and I think it was Thanksgiving. The show was on a Thanksgiving. And obviously Elton had persuaded John to come on and perform with us. And being that John hadn't, everybody kind of goes into the whole thing about how could John Lennon be nervous about going on stage. But I think what people tend to forget is that back in the, he hadn't performed live for years. Yeah. So the whole dynamic was completely different. The monitors on stage, the way that, the technicality of it was completely different.
He wasn't match fit either. That's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't in his wheelhouse anymore. So he was obviously very nervous to the point where he was actually sick backstage. But he had a lot of people backing him up there, and one of them being me. And by the time it was time for him to go on stage, and by the way, he looked like $1 million. I mean, he looked incredible. And he looked every inch the rock god. And so, but at the side of the stage before he went on, he was going, I can't do this. I don't know if I can do this. You got to come on with me. And it's like, and do what? Yeah. What am I supposed to do? Stand there like a complete, just...
Tool.
Tool. Thank you. Tool is the exact thing. So anyway, we ended up sort of propelling him on stage, and the rest is history. And the place went absolutely nuts. I mean, I've been at the Garden for countless shows, and the ground at the Garden used to vibrate. When you were standing there, it was literally like an earthquake, but it was that 10 times. And I mean, the reception he got was phenomenal. And so when he came off stage, obviously he had to go on for an encore. He just literally collared me, stuck a tambourine in my hand and said, "You're coming on now." And again, I still look like a tool.
Yeah. But very amazing story. Can you just back behind that microphone? That's cool, man. Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Oh my goodness me. Let's rewind now. Let's rewind to that fateful day that you saw the ad in the paper, the music paper, the NME, and Elton saw the same one, and you pitched up and you met each other. I didn't realise till I read your book it was love at first sight. You liked Elton straight off the bat, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the first time we met, which is a sort of prologue at the beginning of the book, was at Dick James's studios on New Oxford Street. Now, we'd both been to see Ray Williams, who was the guy that literally put us together, and we'd both been to see him individually, and Elton sort of didn't come across great because he had no original material, so he just played, I think he played Jim Reeves's He'll Have to Go. But I guess for some reason Ray saw something in him, and Elton had said, or Reg as he was back then, had said, well, I really want to write songs, but I don't have any material. I can't write words. I need a lyricist. Or I don't think he said I need one, but I would like one, or intimated that he would like one. And at the same time, I'd been to see Ray Williams slightly before him, and I'd sent in some material. And what happened was basically, as Kismet would have it, he handed my envelope of very, very juvenile lyrics. Well, they weren't really even lyrics. It was just sort of, I was flying by the seat of my pants because I had no idea what it meant to write a lyric or a song lyric anyway. But as fate would have it, he gave them to Elton and arranged for us to meet at Dick James's studio. And Dick James's studio was where a lot of demos, they were actually Dick was actually the publisher of the Beatles.
Yeah.
So a lot of demos were done there, and he had a lot of sort of in-house songwriters. And Elton originally would go there and just play piano for the writers, not recording anything of his own. And so we arranged to meet there, and I sort of was totally a fish out of water and was sitting in the booth waiting. I didn't know where he was, and apparently he was in the studio down the hallway, and I could see him on this little TV, and I kind of said, is that Reg Dwight? And somebody concurred and said, yes, it is, And at that point, the guy who was the engineer sort of turned around and said, are you supposed to be here? And of course, being, this country kid, sitting in this studio in London, it was like, whoa, well, I'm supposed to be. And just as he said that, Elton came through the door and said, is there a Bernie Taupin here? And it was like, that's me, sir, And obviously it was like he just saved my life, literally.
Yeah, someone saved my life tonight.
Yeah, exactly. Or this afternoon, anyway, at least. And so I was immediately sort of attracted to him as a human being. It was like, oh, you just pulled my feet out of the fire. And so I literally, we went around the corner to a place called the Lancaster Grill on Charing Cross Road and bonded immediately.
And you talk about Dick James publishing the Beatles, of course, and in the book you say, and the odd mop top would drop in now and again. So it's funny, obviously we started the conversation with you pushing John Lennon onto the stage, but of course you were nowhere near contemporaries of theirs, and they were at the peak of their powers.
Right.
And they were. What was it like when you saw a Beatle just come into reception or have a cup of tea or whatever they were doing at the time?
You know what? The only one that I ever remember coming in there, and we had sort of two incidents where we ran into McCartney, and I remember McCartney coming in with what was the girl, Mary Hopkins, and I can't remember the name of that song.
Those were the
days, right? And I think I remember him coming in there and doing a demo of it with her, and we just saw him walking through the lobby, and of course that was pretty amazing. But at that particular point in time, Elton was doing playing piano for different bands in the studios, like he played for the Hollies on He Ain't Heavy. Yeah. But he also played with this band called the Barron Knights, who used to do parody records. And we were in the and I used to just come and hang out and be a sort of spare, part with him. And we were in the studio at EMI, and this was right back in the early days. And we were working in there with the Barron Knights, or I was just sitting in the corner, and Paul McCartney was in there and came into the studio and said, oh, I want to play you this new song that we've just written, or I've just written. And he sat down and played Hey Jude in its entirety. And we were just sitting there sort of, is this really happening? Is this really happening?
Little did you know what was going to carry on happening for you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
Cheese, man. Cheese and biscuits, as my little 4-year-old would say. Okay, where do we go now? Let's go anywhere you want. Let's go to you living in America for the first time, falling in love with Los Angeles. Yours and Elton's sound a very sort of West Coast friendly kind of sound, very different to what was going on in the UK at the time. How come you channel that? Where did you get that sound from that was so USA friendly, do you think?
Well, I think that happened before we ever went there. And I think that was just because of the music we listened to. I mean, we were absolutely immersed in music. I mean, Elton and I would go to this place called Music Land on Berwick Street in Soho, which was run by these two incredibly hip gay guys who became really dear friends of ours. And what they would do is they would get American imports in every Friday afternoon of things that, like Electric Ladyland, 2 weeks before it would come out in England. And of course they were in shrink wrap and they had beautiful card sleeves. And back then the English albums had these awful flimsy kind of glossy sleeves. So to get hold of these things before they actually came out here, I remember all kinds of things like Leonard Cohen, Love, Forever Changes, so many albums that were so important in our sort of development. And so it literally came from there because it was all American-based music.
Where do we go next? We could talk about you. I mean, obviously, clearly you've always loved music. You were at the Stones in the Park, 500,000 people. You were there as part of the Massive. You were at the Isle of Wight to watch Bob Dylan. You then met Bob Dylan years and years out. It's so funny, isn't it, when you go and see your heroes and then you're shoulder to shoulder, completely qualified and validated in their company, doing the same thing for a living. How does that feel, Bernie Taupin?
It's natural because it's a natural progression.
It doesn't happen
overnight.
Yeah.
And so as your notoriety sort of fills out and you grow older, but I still think you can slightly be enamored with the company of greats. I've met a lot of very, very special people in my life, but the people that really have impressed me the most are not necessarily they weren't our contemporaries at the time, but they've become our contemporaries. I mean, I've met all those people. I know all those people. I can call a lot of them friends. But there are other people in my life, like literary heroes. Like there's a whole chapter in the book about Graham Greene, who still is probably one of the greatest writers of the 20th century, and I had a fortuitous meeting with him at the Savoy in London, back in the 80s, which probably was the most extraordinary meeting. I mean, that was somebody who really, really impressed me.
Yeah.
Because he was a literary, in the same way as meeting somebody like Sinatra, because it's a different era, and they are so monumental in their historical background. Whereas my contemporaries, or people like the Beatles or the Stones or any of that
ilk.
Yes, exactly. You realize that you basically come from the same foundation.
Yeah, you are qualified. Yeah,
but the way that they were raised on the music too of their past. Not their contemporaries, but by the past. So you have something in common.
Yeah.
Whereas those other people I mentioned, they're from a different era and on a different kind of level.
Yeah.
And those are the people that really, really, I would sort of go, now I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
It's like when you meet an astronaut, I suppose, regardless of what you do for a living, whether you're Paul McCartney or Barack Obama, if you meet an astronaut, they've been to space.
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
different, isn't it?
Exactly, yes.
We've got to go back to you in Elton's house with Sheila. She's got a fried egg on the go, right?
A couple of fried eggs,
and you sit down and you knock out your song in 10 minutes, right? The passage in the book is more profound for its brevity. We need a bit more, mate. It's great. The fact that you just literally, it's like a spit on the page, and then you move on and you go, no! Can you tell us a bit
slow
more?
motion,
right?
Please
tell us, yeah, exactly. Please tell us a bit more about that, Bernie Taupin.
Well, what's interesting is that if anybody's seen the movie Rocket Man, for the most part, that is a fantasy. And it's chronologically, the music's mixed up all over the place. But there are a couple of scenes in Rocket Man that are really, really very much the way that they happened. And that the composition of your song in the movie is really very much the way it happened. I mean, you see Elton and I at the breakfast table. Sheila's in the kitchen. I think Elton's grandmother's in it, but she wasn't there at the time in reality. And there's a scene in the movie that I actually told them they should put in the script because it's something that really happened, and I don't know how many people picked it up in the movie, but you see me writing it at the table, which I did. I was just It was stream of consciousness. It came from a very naive place. And the reason there's all those sort of pregnant pauses in the song is because that's basically how my mind worked at the time, because I was very naive, very virginal. And so it came from that place. But there's a bit in the movie where I kind of pick it up and wave it under Elton's nose, and he kind of looks at it, he picks it up and he goes, "This has got egg on it." And which I remember clearly was the way it happened. And then he took it and went into the living room, where the old stand-up piano was, and sat and basically composed it in a very, very short time.